So the next question I want to ask you, almost all the members of SCO, except India, endorse the Belt and Road Initiative. Though India says that it wants to promote connectivity, it wants to contribute in a multipolar world, but on the other hand, India still considers BRI as a threat for itself. So what does that mean?
Well, this is, of course, partly the nature of a multilateral world, that not everybody has to agree on everything. What's important, of course, firstly, is that each country is in a position to make its own decisions and not be forced by others to do one thing or another. So that's the first thing. Of course, India will have to make its own decisions about what it believes is in its own national interests and also what it believes is acceptable in terms of its own domestic political environment. Now, domestic politics, as we all know, is the result of not only contemporary events, but a consequence of history and culture. And those factors will always play a role in the ways in which nation states and the governments of nation states approach issues of the day and approach the relationships that they have with other states. So India, of course, is now the world's largest population, or the country with the world's largest population. It is developing from a GDP growth point of view at arguably the fastest rate of any nation on earth at the moment. And so India does have responsibilities now as a significant economic player from the global south. India also has a history of being part of the non-aligned movement going back to the 1950s and of having its own um, uh, decolonialization struggles. And all of this calls upon India, in a sense, to discover its place as a contributor to the development of the global south, and not only in terms of its own narrowly defined perspectives of the world, but its role as a contributor to the greater development of the world at large. And that, I think, is one of the challenges that is now in front of a country like India, um, as to how it can step up, if you will, to take on some of the greater responsibilities that come now with being the largest country in the world.
Okay, so Professor Warwick, as you know that Pakistan has been playing a key role in different multilateral institutions. Uh, for Pakistan's national security and economy, what do you see as the biggest opportunity within the framework of Shanghai Cooperation Organization?
The most significant issue always in terms of national security, in my view, is to improve the economic conditions of a country and to ensure that the benefits of economic development are spread fairly and widely. So it is important that as many people and as many regions in a large country are able to improve their quality of life. The second critical thing in terms of national security, so to speak, is to develop more sovereign capabilities in terms of energy. So countries need to be able to guarantee to the greatest extent possible their energy security because at the end of the day, economic systems and social welfare is actually an energy problem. The ability to provide food and housing and all those other things that make for a high quality of life is actually all about the extent to which societies can harness energy and channel energy in useful ways. So energy is critical. The second thing, of course, is to ensure that as a country, it has the ability to become increasingly secure in terms of food. Food is the energy for people, remember. And so we can have fuel for machines, but we have to have food for people. And developing new technologies in terms of um, uh, productive crops, for example, improving the ways in which soil can be managed and enriched so that it is more productive, enhancing the efficiency of the utilization of water, are all vital to the long run security of a country like Pakistan. And of course, Pakistan, as a country, like every other country in these regions, is connected to those around it, which means that it necessarily has to find ways of interacting with its neighbours that minimise the risk of conflict, and at least where there are tensions, have mechanisms by which those tensions can be contained and not spill over. Needless to say, we know, of course, that there has been long-standing tensions
Yeah.
in the relationship between India and Pakistan. And these issues, I think, are not just bilateral issues, but increasingly need to be understood within a broader regional framework. And the security and resolution of these border issues ultimately are, of course, first and foremost, a responsibility for the parties involved,
Yeah.
but also have regional ramifications. And that means that, again, being able to take that broader perspective, right? We can all be very narrow in our approach to every issue, but sometimes finding a solution to a problem that exists between two parties can be done when the parties begin to see themselves as participants in a greater whole. And I'll give you two examples. Not so long ago, Iran and Saudi Arabia had significant problems. The
Yeah.
tensions meant that they no longer had diplomatic relationships. Those have been normalized now. The relationship has been normalized. And China worked hard behind the scenes to enable the normalization of that relationship. Similarly, China spent a lot of time and effort creating the conditions by which 14 competing factions in Palestine could actually come together and form a cohesive grouping of organizations with a common focus. And so addressing tensions and addressing issues sometimes needs to, it challenges the parties to rise above the immediacy of the tensions and understand how it is that those relationships can actually be addressed with a bigger picture in mind. And having that bigger picture in mind also says there are significant opportunities for national welfare improvements, provided that countries can find ways to manage their immediate tensions.